What is unique, in other words, about this pandemic is, apart from the fact it's rather small, is that the damage that it does is self-inflicted. It's rather small in scale, but it's gigantic in consequences because we have chosen to inflict a form of economic suicide on ourselves. There's no other way that one can describe it. Until the weekend, the key weekend, and this will go down in history, this is the first draft of the history of the overreaction to COVID-19 in Britain. Up to that Friday, with the chief medical officer and the chief scientific officer and the prime minister himself, the good sense of the scientists and the statisticians on the one hand, and particularly Boris Johnson's libertarianism and generally, looking on the bright side, the pot half full rather than the pot half empty, we were going to go along with what Sweden has done. We were going to go along with what was demonized as herd immunity, but which would have resulted in things like social distancing, a suggestion that people observed extra special hygiene and that sort of thing, but not this gigantic lockdown. But what happened that weekend, and it's this, Peter, is how history is made. We tend to think of history as being gradual. Yeah. Usually history is a crisis. Things turn on a pin's head. And in that weekend, three things happen. And the first is that the deaths, they're running at about 20 or 30. They double. That looks dramatic. The second thing that happens is the nemesis of Britain, France, President Macron of France, threatens to close the frontier if Britain did not adopt the same kind of extreme measures which France had done. And the third, but those two things are public knowledge. The third thing is private information from a journalist friend of mine who is exceedingly well informed. And on the Sunday, at Northwick Park Hospital in northwest London, one of the areas that has been of the capital that throughout has been worst afflicted by the virus, there were scenes that were reminiscent of what was happening in Italy and what was happening in Spain. Oh. The hospital looked as though it was going to be overwhelmed. The IC unit was, shutting down. There weren't enough ventilators. There were people piling up in admissions. There was, some bodies beginning to collide with incoming patients. And I think at that point, the government simply panics. And a few days later, you get Neil Ferguson's absurd report from Imperial College suggesting 500,000 deaths. And I think the combination of that localized panic and these gigantic figures suddenly landing on their deaths produces a complete change of approach.